So the resource room was empty when I arrived, the students still at recess, and I stood awkwardly in the doorway, not wanting to intrude, but needing somewhere to wait. Mrs. Delaney, Justin's special education teacher, wasn't there yet either. I'd met her several times at IEP meetings where she spoke in jargon about behavioral interventions, skill deficits, and she always seemed competent, if not somewhat detached. Anyway, not wanting to disturb anything, I moved toward a reading nook that was in the corner. It was like a makeshift library area partially hidden by a bookshelf. So I could sit there without being immediately visible when the class came in. It it seemed a little less disruptive and intrusive than being front and center when Justin arrived. So I actually heard them before I saw them, the shuffle of small feet, a few voices, the sound of backpacks being thunked down onto the floor. And then Mrs. Delaney's voice, crisp and authoritative. Everybody to your seats, folders out, pencils ready. And from my corner vantage point, I could see most of the room through a gap in the bookshelf. 5 children took their places at small tables, and Justin was the last to enter. His steps were dragging, his shoulders were hunched forward in that posture that I had come to recognize as his armor against the world. I was about to stand up and get him when something in Mrs. Delaney's tone made me pause. Ah, Justin, she said, her voice carrying like this sharp edge I'd never heard in our meetings. So nice of you to join us today. And my son slid into his chair without looking up, and she just kept going. I asked you a question yesterday that you didn't answer. She continued, and she was just like walking towards his table. Don't you think that was rude? And, Justin's fingers, he began to tap rhythmically on his thigh, one of his self-soothing mechanisms, but he didn't respond. She says, "Hey, I'm talking to you." And she leaned closer, down into his face, uh, but not in the nurturing way I would expect from an educator. This was confrontational. "This is exactly the kind of behavior that gets you sent to the principal's office," she continued. The other children had gone completely still, and their eyes were darting between their teacher and my son. And Justin curled in on himself further, just like making his already small frame seem tiny, and his tapping increased in speed. "Use your words," Miss Delaney demanded. "We don't act like babies in this classroom." Oh my gosh, I felt sick. Was this what was happening every day? Was this why he fought coming to this room? Why he'd sooner face punishment than enter this space? Justin remained silent, but I could see he was, breathing faster. He was retreating into himself, going to that internal place where he felt safe. And Mrs. Delaney's frustration seemed to grow with his silence. "This is exactly what I've been documenting: defiance and refusal to participate, disrespect." I could not believe what I was witnessing. This was not educational support. This was provocation. This was a power struggle with a child who was clearly in distress. "When you don't answer adults, Justin, it just makes them angry. Is that what you want? To make people angry with you?" And then his tapping stopped. His small body curled tighter, and he was almost a ball in the chair. I knew that posture. It was his last defense before fight or flight kicked in. I probably should have intervened sooner. I was in shock. I should have stopped this the moment it began, but the shock had me glued to my seat. Disbelief that a special education professional would speak to any child, let alone my child, this way, with documented sensory and processing differences. "Answer me." Her voice didn't rise to a yell, but the intensity of it sliced through the room as if she did. And that's what had happened. Justin uncurled suddenly, his face contorted, and he released a sound I'd never heard from him before. Not quite a scream, not quite a word, but a release of pure distress. I was on my feet. "I'll take my son now," I said, stepping behind that book from behind the bookshelf, and Mrs. Delaney's face would have been comical under any other circumstance. Shock giving way to professional panic as she realized someone had witnessed her behavior. "Miss Del Valle, I didn't realize." "A, we have a meeting with the principal," I cut her off, my voice steadier than I felt, "and I have seen enough." I went over to Justin, who was trembling now, and I gently gathered his things from his desk. "Come with me," I said, softly extending my hand, and I said, "I've got you." His small fingers clutched mine with surprising strength as we walked down that room. In the hallway, I knelt down to his level, seeing the remnants of fear still etched on his face. And I told him, "You are never going back to that classroom," I promised him. "Never." And as we walked toward the principal's office, a strange calm settled about me, and the panic about tomorrow's HR meeting just evaporated, was gone. My priorities had never been clearer. Some moments, they just change everything. Sitting hidden in that resource room corner had been mine. I'd glimpsed the truth behind my son's resistance, behind the phone calls, the increasing anxiety about school. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I didn't know if I'd have a job tomorrow. I didn't know if we'd stay in this school or find somewhere new. But one thing I knew with absolute certainty: the system that was supposed to support my child had become the very thing harming him. And I was done being polite about it. Oh, when we entered the principal's office, he wasn't alone. The school psychologist was there. The district special education coordinator was there too. Clearly, a meeting arranged to discuss Justin's behavior issues. Perfect. Sweet. I had an audience. So I settled Justin with his iPad in a chair by the door, and I turned to face them. And I said, "Hey, before we begin," I said, my voice level, "I just think you should know. I just witnessed Miss Delaney verbally provoking my son until he had a meltdown. If that is how your resource room operates, we have a much bigger problem than my work schedule." And their faces told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't news to them. And that's when I truly understood. Sometimes advocacy means being willing to burn every bridge, if that's what it takes, to get your child to safer ground. So I told him, I said, "Hey, so let's talk about Justin's IEP. I think it needs some immediate changes."